современном обществе существует огромное количество табу, и любое табу вызывает интерес. И один из основных интересов – это интерес к сексуальности и сексу. В любой духовной традиции мы так или иначе сталкиваемся с различными мистическими переживаниями, и зачастую эти переживания напрямую связаны с сексом, сексуальной культурой. Если говорить о сексуальности, то сексуальность – это умение давать и получать удовольствие через тело. Если говорить о сексе, то, наверное, здесь уместна метафора, что секс – это транспорт к Богу, транспорт к расширенным состояниям сознания. Через секс мы можем постигать себя, это некий инструмент самоисследования и самотрансформации. И сегодняшний воркшоп будет как раз посвящен исследованию сексуальности, исследованию секса, исследованию духовных традиций, которые так или иначе связаны с сексом. И я хочу представить психолога, доктора Женни Уэйт, которая сегодня будет вести этот воркшоп. Спасибо.
Hello. I'm sure you're not here for me, but to learn more about sex and transcendent states. I'm being translated? Yes? Can you hear the translation? Do we have translation now? Okay. Okay. Translation, yes? Okay. I would like to, I'm going to be reporting today on some research that I've conducted in the United States and that is now being replicated by other researchers. The study that I want to talk about, I conducted with people who have already had unusual or altered state experiences during sex. And probably some of you in this room have had such experiences. How many of you, when you went to bed with your partner and were not using drugs or not practicing Tantra, have had an unusual or altered state experience? Anybody? Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about. For my study, I selected only people who had had these kinds of experiences. I went to conferences like this, and I would just, or because I lecture at a lot of universities and graduate schools, and I would just, after I gave a lecture on something else, say, has anyone in this audience had what you would consider to be a mystical, transcendent, non-ordinary, or altered state when you were making love with a partner? And those were the people that I interviewed. I required that the people not be using any drugs that could perhaps have been responsible for the state. And I also wanted to talk to people who were not engaged in the esoteric sexual practices that we know bring about altered states, such as Taoism or Tantra. I was also seeking people who had perceived that they had a partner during this experience who were not masturbating. Next slide. The total sample that I got was 91 people, and I stopped at that point because I began to get saturation. Many more people were having the same kinds of experiences. My sample was 33 men, 53 women, and you can see here their ages. The majority of them were in middle age, but they went up to people who were almost 70 years old and people as young as 20. I did not ask for people younger than 21 because of legal requirements that they be an adult able to give informed consent in the United States. Next. They tended to be well educated because normally I speak at universities and graduate schools. Next slide. They had all kinds of sexual preference for partners, although the majority of them were heterosexual. My sample included bisexual and homosexual people as well. When I talked to them, I did not ask them any questions about what kind of state they had. I just asked them to tell me their story. But I was looking for, and I only included people whose experience matched the clinical definition for an altered state. They had to have unusual sensory input or sensory experiences with no obvious stimulus. They had to have a change in their sense of agency in terms of who was doing what to whom, a sense of self changing, a sense of change in space or time. Okay, next slide. The kinds of experiences that people had tended to exist on a continuum from fairly ordinary to extremely different. In the continuum, with the more ordinary ones, people were still aware that they were here and now. They were still in a bedroom or somewhere having sex with a partner, and they were their normal selves. But something else changed. Usually they had unusual sensory perceptions that they had never had before, or perhaps something about their partner changed. They envisioned their partner differently. Next, they were still aware that they were here and now, but something about themselves changed, so they had an unusual experience of self. Then next, they no longer were here. They were no longer in the room where they perceived themselves to be, but the surroundings seemed to have changed. Or in the next one, their sense of time changed. They were not in the present, or the passage of time was not occurring the way it does in ordinary consciousness. Then finally, they were not here, it was not now, and they were not themselves. This was usually a full past life experience where they suddenly found themselves in another time and in another place and completely in another body, thinking thoughts that were not typical for them. And then in the last, they experienced non-duality. It was like a Sartori or a Samadhi state, unio mystica, becoming one with God, but all categories of experience completely vanished. General findings that I had confounded all my beliefs about the study when I first began. First of all, orgasm by itself is an altered state. We all know that. These experiences of altered states during sex were completely independent of orgasm. So people could easily distinguish the altered state from orgasm. And in fact, many people found orgasm to be an annoying distraction. One woman said, I don't even want to have that stupid little spasm when I'm in this altered state, because the altered states, for the most part, are so ecstatic and so compelling. They don't want to have an orgasm. Some people didn't even remember whether they'd had an orgasm or not. That's how big these experiences can be. There were no sex differences. And this surprised me because I thought women, because they can often have multiple orgasms and their brain physiology then changes, they can stay up for a very long time, might be more inclined to have these experiences than men whose arousal curve is much different. That was not the case. Men and women both have these experiences, and there is no difference that I could discern in this fairly small sample between men and women and the kinds of experiences that they had. There was also no obvious correlation between sexual technique or the mechanics of sex and the kinds of states people had. So it didn't really matter what they were doing. There was also no relationship with the quality of the relationship they had. It would be very romantic to believe that only people who are in true love have these wonderful experiences. But that was not the case. People who are having one-night stands, transient sex, very casual sex, pick up somebody at a bar, could have one of these amazing experiences. People who had been married for 30 years and never had one before could suddenly have one. One woman in particular had been married for 20 years, and she hated her husband. They'd been out of love for a long time, but they were having sex, and in fact, she was trying to tune him out, to ignore him while they were having sex when it happened to her. So, go ahead. The qualities that all of these experiences share is that there was some felt sense of supernatural love, or a supernatural force, something much bigger than the two lovers or than the union of their sexuality that overcame them or overtook them. There was no relationship between what they believed religiously or spiritually and the experience. Jewish people saw the Virgin Mary or experienced Christ. Christian people had pagan or shamanic experiences. It was all over the place. So it was completely independent of their religious orientation. It was also completely independent of their personal ability to experience altered states. People who had meditated for 30 years in one tradition or multiple traditions had experiences that were completely unlike their meditation. People who had never meditated a day in their lives went right into samadhi or satori. So there was also no connection there. So sex, it seems, is a trickster. Sex can be a real surprise. I was deliberately selecting people who had no experience with Tantra because I wanted them not to have convenient categories or beliefs about their experience. So I wanted to know, how does someone who just spontaneously has an experience like this, how do they understand it? What meaning do they put on it? And what kind of experience do they have without any conditioning? So go on to the next. The varieties of experience they have match almost every kind of paranormal experience that we've identified, as well as the experiences that are identified in spiritual traditions as signs of attainment. And I'm going to go through these quickly, but then I'm going to give you some deeper examples of these. Up at the top of each slide, you see the percentage of women and the percentage of men who have had who reported these experiences in the sample. Clairsentience, or what I'm calling clairsentience here, was when people were making love with their partner and they had a sudden realization of everything that was true. Sometimes it was just what was true about the partner and the relationship, but at other times it was some huge realization about reality and the nature of reality and the way the world works. The revelation came out of nowhere. They had not been thinking about it. It wasn't, and oftentimes it was a complete surprise to them. One man, for example, had gone to a wedding with his girlfriend and his best friend. And during the party after the wedding, he and his girlfriend snuck off to his car and were having sex in the back seat. While they were doing that, he suddenly had one of these experiences where he knew that his best friend, whom they just left at the party, was in terrible physical danger. So he threw on his clothes and started running, and he knew not to go back to the reception hall where the party was, but instead to go 2 or 3 streets away. And when he got there, he found that his friend was being beaten up by 2 or 3 thugs, and he threw himself into the fight to save his friend. He never had anything like that happen to him before, and it never happened again. But it was this opening during sex with his girlfriend that suddenly this came to him. Kundalini. Of course, we all know what Kundalini is from Hinduism and yogic practices. It's when you have an unusual experience of energy. It can look like lights, a surge of heat or electricity in your body. The people in this study had Kundalini kinds of experiences. Of course, they didn't, since they weren't practicing Tantra, many of them didn't know this word, and they didn't know how to describe what happened, but they would describe seeing colors or feeling electricity or incredible heat come off of their bodies or feeling that their bodies were melting away. They also went into involuntary movements like glossolalia, which is speaking in tongues, which is reported in the Bible, as a mark of the Holy Ghost. People also had visions of other beings in the room. This was non-voluntary imagery where they were aware that they were still in the room, but they would suddenly see other entities, usually gods or deities, in the room, not in their tradition. One woman saw the rainbow serpent, Quetzalcoatl, of the South American tradition. People also saw angels or had demonic visions that were very frightening to them. A number of people, a fairly large percentage, had an experience that they called the third, meaning the third presence in the room. This was a very loving being. It was experienced, and many called it the Holy Ghost after the Christian tradition. This sense of the third arose from their partnership. They believed it was part of the fact that they were sexually joined, but it couldn't be reduced to that, and they had no control over it. This force just seemed to come up and to be present in a very loving way in the room. A number of people, especially if they were making love outdoors, felt a magical connection with the creatures around them. They felt sometimes that the trees were talking to them or protecting them somehow, or that they could communicate with animals. Another experience that came up that was fairly often reported and is common in many other spiritual traditions is called trespasso. And it is the sense when you see another face superimposed on the face of the person you're gazing at. So a person would see their lover begin to change and morph into many different people while they were making love to them. Out-of-body experiences were also very common, where the person would begin to rise up out of their body, no longer be present in it, and be looking at the couple making love from somewhere up around the ceiling. Sometimes this was extremely frightening for people. One woman thought that she was dying and that her soul was leaving her body. Her lover had to calm her down very carefully, and because he had done some training with me, he knew what to tell her to do. And so he stroked her and encouraged her to just close her eyes again while he did not intensify the sexual contact. And when she did that, she went into a deep trance and said that she saw God. And when she saw God, this experience was very different from what she ever anticipated. Her vision of God up to that point was that he was a very stern boss. And she thought he would pull out a list of paper and say, you haven't done this, you haven't done this, you've been very bad at that. But instead, she found that everything about her life was perfect, and that everything she had ever felt bad about was completely forgiven. And this woman had had many errors on her mind. She had just failed in a mission that she had overseas working with orphans who were refugees. And in fact, she had been so bad at that job that the volunteer agency she worked for sent her back to the United States. And she was mortified by this, so she thought God was really going to get on her case about it. When he didn't, when she came out of her trance, she began vomiting. She was very, very ill, and she couldn't stop. And that's why they called me, because they said, we know she didn't have food poisoning, but she can't stop throwing up. And at the same time that she was throwing up, she was ecstatic. She didn't care if she was sick, but her boyfriend was very worried. She was absolutely ecstatic. And by the time they came to me, she was a little bit better. So I was asking her, what happened, when you had this experience? And when she told me about this refugee failure that she had and how bad she had felt about it, I said, well, what did you do when you came back to the United States in disgrace? And she said, I just had to swallow my guilt. I had to swallow all this bad thing that happened to me and keep it down. So, of course, what happened when she saw God and he forgave her, she didn't have to keep anything bad inside her anymore. So it all came back up, and she lost it. And she never felt guilty again. So this is some of the kind of experience that can happen during this. In transports, people suddenly find themselves out of the room where they are and in a completely different landscape. They may be flying over the natural world. They may find themselves in another civilization or out in space. A lot of the time they're under the water or out in space where they have a sense of being able to move in 3 dimensions. Another kind of experience is shape-shifting, where people feel their bodies transmogrifying into the bodies of different animals, like a wolf or a bear or a lion. And their sexual activity sometimes can become not just rough, but very animalistic. One man said he began biting the shoulder of his partner and making love to her exactly the way the big cats do, grabbing her with his fingernails. In deity possession, many people experience themselves as another deity, and often these are the gods and goddesses we associate with sex and death, like Kali, or Pan, or Bacchus. In channeling, this is something Stan Groff sees often in holotropic breathwork. People suddenly feel all of a class of being coming into their body. All children, all women, warriors, oppressors, the oppressed, coming through them with emotions that are not theirs. In telepathy, people can access the unspoken thoughts of another. Usually it's their partner. And people have had unnerving experiences when their lover suddenly revealed something to them that they were thinking that they thought was private and secret. Merging with a partner in many cases, someone blends so fully with their partner that they no longer feel that they're themselves. Next. People become absolutely one with all of there is in the natural world, everything in nature. People experience complete past life stories while they're making love. These usually involve the partner, and in these situations, both people go into the same altered state and seem to be living out the same life story. And unlike the other situations, these usually end badly. These other stories typically have very sad or disturbing endings that are frightening to the lovers and seem to bear no obvious resemblance to the life they have currently, although a therapist would immediately see that there are many, many connections with what is going on. Finally, unio mystica, like in the Western tradition, where people become one with God. These are profoundly moving experiences where people just vanish into the light of God. They have no idea how long they are there. And it's exactly like those described by the saints, phenomenologically. We've done a deep analysis of these. And similarly, next slide, going into the void, an experience of complete non-duality in the Eastern tradition, where you just go into emptiness and then dissolve. And what I'd like to do now is pause with the slides and read in their own words some of these accounts from people about what happened to them, because these are amazing experiences. And unlike just the research itself, I would like to read you a story that involved both partners, but they were having different experiences. The woman I called Eve. She had a history of sexual abuse. There were about 9 or 10 people in my sample who had been badly sexually abused as children. And like many people who had suffered abuse, she had never been able to enjoy sex. She did not have an orgasm. She dissociated during sex. She did not want to be there. She did not experience pleasure in her body. She was very frozen. She had already had one relationship with a sexually abusive partner as an adult. This was her second attempt to have a relationship, and this time she chose a non-abusive partner whose name is Hamilton. She says, I am a survivor of incest. I had just been in a bad first marriage. So my sexual encounters were just physical, nothing emotional, and nothing good ever happened. It was Christmas Eve, and my relationship with Hamilton was new. We were visiting my mother, who was Christian, and they went to midnight mass on Christmas Eve. We got into bed after mass and made the most physically sensual love I have ever experienced. It was more intense because for the first time I had some mind-body integration. Previously during sex, my mind was blank, except that I was wishing sex would end. This time, I could feel it. While we were making love, then it went beyond just feeling, and I had the most incredible spiritual awakening. I felt I had actually attained a higher plane. I suddenly felt one with and at peace with the entire universe. My partner became an extension of my physical being. I felt like I had received a gift from God in this experience, and like I had truly made love for the first time in my life. My perspective on sex has changed dramatically. Now it is no longer a chore or something I just have to do. It now is a chance for me to commune with my husband's soul and to feel that I have a body. I learned that it was okay to relax. Sometimes it is still very hard for me to achieve this relaxed state and to trust myself. But now I know if I can open up, there's a warm, rich reward waiting for me in my soul as well as in my body. I have never forgotten it. This one experience makes me feel wonderment and happiness every time I think about it. I was for the first time aware of being one with the greater good that was all around me. And now I feel open and ready to receive whatever the universe has to offer. That feeling has stayed with me ever since that day. Now, her husband, Hamilton, has never been abused. He was raised in a Jewish household, but he is an atheist. And he still says he's an atheist. But he says, nearly every time I make love with Eve, something comes over me. I find myself becoming one with her, and the rest of reality disappears. It's like hitting the zoom control on a video camera at full speed and all the way to capture an image very, very far away. We get so close, I can't tell whose body it is, Eve's or mine. Our oneness is the only thing I feel, and it's the most complete experience I have ever had. I don't hear or see anything but her. All my senses come together. It's like the supercharged intensity of a laser. I seem to receive incredible amounts of energy from her, but hers is not depleted. I am helpless to fight this state. Nothing on earth, no drug I have ever taken, compares with this. I feel when I am with her as close to worship as I will ever get. She becomes to me who others describe as God. It's my perception that her soul and my soul simply fuse. 15 or 16 minutes after orgasm, I suddenly begin to see her as separate again, and my feelings become the greatest of gratitude, emotional restoration, and absolute fulfillment. Sex before Eve was nothing but masturbation with a partner. It was purely physical, more like the release provided by a sneeze or relief from constipation. Lovemaking with her, though, is better than any fantasy I could ever have. I became a whole person the day she and I first touched. When I look now at videos or photographs of me taken before, I don't even feel like I'm looking at myself. The way I saw myself before that day was purely career-based. When I look at myself since, I am more likely to see how well I'm doing as a father, a husband, a son, and how I've become increasingly receptive to and dependent on love as the measure of life's quality. Sorry, go back. This is what happens to people. The effects of these experiences have the same profound, transformative power that mystical experiences from meditation or prayer have, even though this happens during sex. Of the people that I talked to, you can see almost half of the men and half of the women said that they had come out of this experience as though they had a spiritual awakening. For many, this meant a radical shift in their religious beliefs. Atheists and agnostics became spiritual seekers, or people changed from one religious background to another tradition that more nearly fit the experience that they had had. You can see in the red lines show the traditional religions the people were brought up in before they had these experiences. The green lines show the religions that they are following now, if they belong to another tradition. Many of them, the most, now follow a personal or eclectic kind of spirituality that is more congruent with their experiences. Following that, you see many of them are Buddhist, or have gone into yoga, paganism, transcendental meditation, mystical Judaism. A few of the people still maintained that they were atheists or agnostics, but the language that they used when they were talking about their experience always had the word God in it. So I left them to their classification, but I noticed that there was a big discrepancy between how they talked about what happened and what they claimed for themselves as their beliefs. People experienced significant personal growth as a result of these experiences. These were positive changes in the way they organized their lives. Many of them came out of these experiences having paranormal abilities, particularly precognitive abilities, and telepathy. Some also had an ability to heal. From the Kundalini experience, they had a lot of energy in their bodies and could now do energetic touch and healing with other people. People found not only the strength, but also the will to change dysfunctional parts of their lives. They got out of bad relationships. They changed their career path from something that had maybe been very success-oriented to something that was more fulfilling. They let go of dysfunctional behaviors, many of them dysfunctional sexual behaviors, but also alcoholism and other other dependency problems. And they let go of self-limiting beliefs. People suddenly had a greater and more positive vision of themselves. Certainly, this also enhanced their relationships, particularly their relationships with their partners. Many people found that it was much easier to love their partners unconditionally, no matter how irritating, things are in a relationship. But a lot of them also had much greater compassion for everyone in the world. And certainly, a lot of them forgave themselves. People, because of these experiences, it was like a drug experience. They suddenly perceived that reality was much larger and much more different than they had ever imagined. So it changed their worldview about what was possible and what ultimate reality really is. And for a smaller percentage, people began to understand that sex is sacred, sex is holy. This was especially important to the people who had a history of abuse, for whom sex had been dirty, ugly, and degrading. But also a lot of people in the sample who were very promiscuous and took sex very casually. They suddenly said, no, I can't have sex with everybody I'm inclined to. This is too important. I must protect and be mindful of my sexual energy and how I wish to blend that with another person. And in fact, one man who had just made love to any woman he could ever find and realized that he had a healing capacity after he came out of this experience. He had a past life, when his sexual experience was that he had past life experience of being a tantric teacher, but not a good one. A tantric teacher who abused his followers and took advantage of them. He suddenly realized what a wrong thing this was to do and that he was replicating it in his life now in a different way. And when he discovered that he had an ability to use tantric energy to heal, he now only will go to bed with women that he believes he can use his energy in a sacred way to heal damage that they have and heal it in their bodies. So he has become a sacred sexual healer as a result of this one experience. As I said, then the people who have had sexual trauma find that they don't have it anymore. They can enjoy sex. They can be orgasmic. And in fact, one woman who had a history of abuse has become a sexual surrogate, working with other people now as a sexual partner to help them heal from their abuse. When I looked at the survey overall to see what the complex relationships were among all the sample, I found that there was a relationship between the kind of experiences people had and the outcomes that they got and how often they had these experiences. The vast majority of people only had this kind of transcendent sexual experience with one partner, and that tended to make them believe that they could never have it with anyone else and that one relationship must be unusually blessed, that this is my true love, this is the partner I should be with. This caused a crisis if they ever broke up because they were afraid they would never have these experiences again. But for people who tended to have these experiences with one partner and who had experiences with a lot of content that was very specifically religious or spiritual, like unio mystica, becoming one with God, or going into the void, or experiencing this third presence like the Holy Ghost or like God in the room. These people tended to then come out believing that sex was absolutely sacred, a sacred event, and that they could participate in it only in a particular way. There was a third group of people who tended to have these experiences with more than one partner, so they began to realize it wasn't something about the partner or maybe even something about sex. It might be a capacity that they had that was activated during sex. And when this was coupled with experiences that had unusual but not specifically religious imagery, like Kundalini energy, a sense of merging and becoming one with the partners, or having a past life experience, these were the people who most often came out with a sense of personal change. I can change my life now. I can be a larger person. I can be bigger in the world than I have been before. And finally, there were a few people in my sample who always have sex this way. They were rare. They were out many standard deviations, but they don't know what ordinary sex is, or if they have it, that's what happens on a bad day. In fact, one man said, "I don't know why you bother with sex like that. What's the point?" So for these people, most of them had non-spiritual experiences. They tended to channel other entities. They were into shape-shifting. They saw the other partner's face change. They were possessed by other entities. they were transported to other environments, or they became one with the creatures in nature. And this was not associated with any single outcome in particular. They had various kinds of outcomes in terms of this as a practice. Because this is life as usual for them. It's nothing special. But for most people, this was a profoundly life-changing event. Many of the people wanted to know how they could cultivate this further, or if they were in a relationship with a person where this was occurring regularly, they wanted to remain in that relationship. But the healing power of these kinds of experiences, even though they happened during sex, when people were not expecting it, it was not part of a religious system of belief, still had the same profound impact on people that a drug experience can have, or a mystical experience from a religious practice can have. So this capacity for human beings to use the energy of sex and the connection with a partner to have a transcendent experience is one that we all have. Based on my research and some other research that I had to dig out, it appears that probably 1 in 8 people will have one of these experiences at least once in their lives without even trying. You can enhance that capability or create more possibility for that if you do practice Tantra or Taoist sex or do some other practices that will help you cultivate this capacity. It can be dangerous, though, like any altered state you're not prepared to have. Because I was talking only to people who were not training to do this, to whom it happened as a surprise, some of them had difficulty with the experience. And in fact, it was very disruptive to a few. Some of them were with partners who were not supportive or were in fact exploitative. One man I interviewed who could do this very carefully, he had practiced many meditation traditions, and he was very skilled with paranormal powers. And he went to events like this, where people were more open to this kind of thing, and he deliberately selected attractive-looking women and began to focus on them to draw them to him just so he could have sex with them and then discard them. You've all heard of gurus who do this as well. So it's very important to realize that when you're exchanging sexual energies with people, it can open you up to a lot. And if you're not mentally prepared, and if you're not very discerning about your partner, you can create some significant vulnerability and hazard for yourself. Other people, just because their worldview was very materialistic or very atheistic, could not understand what had happened to them and thought they were going crazy. Some people energetically lost their boundaries and were not able to get them back. One man actually had to change his profession, which had been very interactive at an intense level with people in the financial market, to become a professor where he could stand at the front of the room and not interact with his students. He just lectured. He could no longer have sex with women without blending with them so psychologically that whatever their psychological problems were, he began to manifest those problems. That included another man who got sick. He got ill with whatever his partners had, instantly. If his partner had allergies, as soon as he started making love to her, he would develop the same allergies and couldn't get rid of them for several weeks. So this is very powerful stuff. If you think that this is a capacity that you want to encourage or you want to develop, I would strongly recommend that you find a safe partner and a safe venue in which to do it. If you choose to learn some of the techniques, which you can learn through Tantra, but many other techniques, there's Quodoshka in the Native American tradition, Taoist sex. There are many things that will enhance this capability. Choose a good teacher, an ethical teacher, and a partner who is psychologically pretty healthy to do this, because there's a lot of transference that can go on here. The benefits to this path can be amazing, but in the end, it's not about the sex per se. It's not a gift that your partner gives to you. This is a capacity that each of us as human beings have. For some of us, sex is the way there. For others, it's meditation. For others, it may be drugs or something else. But this is what we all have inside of us and can activate. I'd like to end with just a short passage in the words of a man who is an atheist. I'll start with a woman who is an atheist who said she was still an atheist at the end of telling me about her experiences. She was a lesbian, and she had been with several different partners before she had met one with whom she had this experience. And she said, I'm an atheist, I'm an agnostic, I've been searching. I'm still searching for something to believe in. But this experience with her made me feel connected to the universe and with whatever other people sometimes call God. It's strange, because I thought if you were ever going to meet God, you would have to go through fasting, go to the mountaintop to pray, meet the guru. I didn't think you could do it through sex. Especially as a lesbian, I was always told that was wrong. But this experience now has residual. I'm a completely different person. I feel good about myself now. And it wasn't like God's finger came down from heaven and hit me on the head and said, "You've changed." But many things have changed for me in the wake of this experience. What's different is that instead of arguing about God or reading about God, I can see God the way I see the color blue. I feel God in my body. I know that it's really true. I am a part of everything there is. And another man said, who is also an atheist before, but now says he believes, transcendent sex gives you a glimpse of the divine that is always present in all of us. It just shows you, this is what you are. This is where you're going. This is where you've always been. This is what your true nature is. You open yourself up to God, and you find that you are divine at the same time. So, I welcome all of you to make this wonderful discovery for yourselves. And I will be talking about this and other similar ideas in a panel this afternoon with several of my colleagues here. I hope you'll join us.
One question. What means the F and M on your diagram?
Females, women, and males, men.
For F.
F is female.